The boy who wanted Rome had survived kings. It had survived foreign invasions. It had defeated powerful enemies across Italy. And it had built an expanding republic that seemed strong enough to last forever. But centuries later, Rome would face a different kind of threat. Not an invading army, not a foreign king, not a distant empire. The danger would come from one of Rome's own citizens. A young Roman named Gaius Julius Caesar. He was born into an ancient aristocratic family. But when Caesar entered the world in 100 BC, his family was no longer among the most powerful in Rome. The republic was already changing. Political rivalries were becoming increasingly dangerous. Ambitious generals commanded enormous armies. Wealthy politicians competed for influence. And ordinary Romans were becoming deeply divided. Caesar was born directly into this world of ambition. From an early age, he learned that power in Rome belonged to those who could build alliances, win public support, and survive their enemies. But Caesar's path would almost be destroyed before it truly began, when he was still a young man. Rome was torn apart by a brutal political struggle. Two powerful figures stood at the center of the crisis, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Both were celebrated Roman commanders. Both had enormous political ambitions. And eventually, they became enemies. Their supporters divided Rome into opposing factions. When Sulla finally defeated his rivals, he returned to Rome with an army. That decision changed Roman politics forever, for generations. Roman armies had officially served the Republic. Now a Roman commander had marched his soldiers against Rome itself. Sulla became dictator and began eliminating his political enemies. Among the names placed in danger was Caesar. He was young. He had little military power, and he had committed no great crime. His real mistake was his family connections. Caesar had married Cornelia, the daughter of an important political opponent of Sulla. Sulla demanded that Caesar divorce her. Caesar refused. It was an extraordinarily dangerous decision. He was still a young man. He had almost no influence. Sulla controlled Rome, and refusing the dictator could easily mean death. Caesar went into hiding for a time. He lived under constant threat of arrest. His friends tried to persuade Sulla to forgive him. Eventually, Sulla agreed, but according to later historians, he warned those around him that Caesar would one day become a serious threat. Whether the exact warning was spoken, as later writers claimed, is uncertain. But Caesar survived, and survival would become one of the defining features of his life. He left Rome and began building the skills that would eventually transform him into one of the most powerful men in history. Caesar joined the Roman military. There, he gained experience far beyond what his political position had previously given him. He learned how soldiers behaved, how commanders earned loyalty, how discipline worked, and perhaps most importantly, he learned that military reputation could become political power. But Caesar understood something else. Rome was not controlled by soldiers alone. It was controlled by public opinion, by speeches, by alliances, by elections, by money, and by the ability to make ordinary citizens believe that their interests mattered. Caesar would eventually become extremely skilled at all of them. When he returned to Rome, he entered politics. He did not begin as the most powerful man in the Republic, far from it. He had rivals with greater wealth, more powerful families, and stronger political connections. Caesar compensated with something else, relentless ambition. He spent enormous amounts of money building his reputation. He sponsored public celebrations, games, religious ceremonies, and spectacles that attracted huge crowds. Some of his spending pushed him deeply into debt to Caesar. That debt was not simply a financial burden. It was an investment. Every festival increased his popularity. Every alliance expanded his influence. Every political victory brought him closer to the highest offices in Rome. And slowly, the young aristocrat who had once hidden from Sulla began climbing the political ladder. He became a military commander, then a governor, then a consul. But Caesar still needed something Rome's political system could not easily provide: a powerful alliance. He found it in two men. One was Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome. The other was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great. Pompey was one of Rome's most successful generals. He had won enormous military victories. He possessed fame, wealth, and a powerful network of supporters. Crassus had money. Pompey had military prestige. Caesar had political ambition. Together, they formed an unofficial alliance that would later become known as the First Triumvirate. It was not an official government. It was something more dangerous, a private agreement between three powerful men who could help each other dominate Roman politics. Caesar gained what he wanted, a path toward greater power. But he understood that political influence alone would never be enough. He needed an army, and soon. Rome gave him the opportunity he had been waiting for. Caesar was appointed governor of several territories in Gaul. To many Romans, this looked like another political appointment. To Caesar, it was the beginning of something much greater. Gaul was not a single unified kingdom. It was a vast region inhabited by numerous tribes. Some were wealthy, some were powerful, some were hostile to Rome, and many were already competing against one another. Caesar now had command of experienced Roman legions. He had authority, he had soldiers, and he had a frontier filled with potential enemies for the first time. Caesar possessed the ingredients necessary to build his own military reputation. But there was a problem. If Caesar remained in Gaul, he could become powerful. If he conquered Gaul, he could become famous. And if he became too successful, Rome itself might begin to fear him. Caesar knew the risk, but he also understood the opportunity. He would later claim that his campaigns were necessary to protect Rome, to defend allies, to prevent dangerous tribes from threatening Roman territory. But behind the official explanations, another reality was taking shape. Caesar needed victories, he needed wealth, he needed loyal soldiers, and he needed a reputation powerful enough to protect him when he eventually returned to Rome. The first major confrontation would come sooner than expected. A large migration was underway among the Helvetii. Caesar saw the movement as a potential threat. He mobilized his army. The campaign that followed would draw Rome deeper into Gaul. And once Caesar began winning, there would be no easy way to stop, because the man who had once been hunted by a dictator was now building something far more dangerous, an army that believed in him, a fortune that could finance his ambitions, and a military reputation that would soon make him famous throughout the Roman world. Caesar had entered Gaul as a Roman governor, but he would not leave it as the same man. The conquest had begun. Caesar conquers Gaul. Caesar had entered Gaul with a clear objective: build an army, win victories, and return to Rome with a reputation impossible to ignore. But he soon discovered that Gaul would offer far more resistance than he expected. The region was enormous. Hundreds of tribes occupied its forests, valleys, mountains, and river plains. Some fought each other. Others formed temporary alliances, and many had no desire to accept Roman authority. Caesar understood their greatest weakness: they were divided. If Rome could prevent the tribes from uniting, Caesar could defeat them one at a time. His first major challenge came from the Helvetii. They were migrating westward with families, animals, and large quantities of supplies. Caesar claimed their movement threatened Roman allies. He moved quickly. The Roman army intercepted them. What followed was a major confrontation. Roman discipline proved decisive. The Helvetii were defeated, but Caesar did not stop. Another threat was already emerging. A powerful Germanic leader named Ariovistus had crossed the Rhine with his warriors. Several Gallic tribes feared him. Caesar presented himself as their protector. He demanded that Ariovistus withdraw. The Germanic leader refused. The two armies eventually faced each other. Roman soldiers were nervous. The enemy had a fearsome reputation, but Caesar's army held firm. The battle ended with an overwhelming Roman victory. Ariovistus escaped across the Rhine. Caesar had achieved exactly what he needed. Two major victories, two powerful enemies defeated, and an increasingly confident army. But these victories created another problem. Every success made Caesar more famous back in Rome. His political enemies watched carefully. Some admired his achievements. Others feared what his growing military power could mean. Caesar understood that he could not afford to stop. The next years became a continuous cycle of campaigning. One tribe resisted. Caesar attacked. Another alliance formed. He marched again. The Roman army crossed rivers, built fortified camps, constructed bridges, and fought in conditions unfamiliar to many of its soldiers. Caesar personally inspected positions, moved rapidly between units, and rewarded courage. His soldiers began developing a powerful personal loyalty toward him. They were not simply fighting for Rome, they were fighting for their commander. And Caesar knew exactly how valuable that loyalty would become. Then came one of the most extraordinary engineering achievements of the entire Gallic War, the Rhine. For centuries, the great river had represented a natural boundary between Roman Gaul and the Germanic world. Caesar wanted to send a message. Rome could cross it whenever it wanted. His engineers constructed a massive wooden bridge. The project was completed astonishingly quickly. Roman troops marched across. Caesar entered Germanic territory, but he did not remain there for long. The demonstration had achieved its purpose. He had shown that the Rhine could not protect Rome's enemies then. Caesar turned toward an even greater challenge, Britain, beyond the sea. Roman knowledge of Britain was limited. Merchants had described distant tribes, strange customs, unknown coastlines, and valuable resources. Caesar decided to investigate for himself. In 55 BC, Roman ships crossed the English Channel. The invasion force approached the British coast, but the landing was difficult. The beaches were heavily defended. Roman soldiers hesitated. Then Caesar's standard-bearer made a famous decision. He leapt into the water carrying the eagle, the symbol of the legion. His action encouraged the soldiers. They followed him toward the shore. The Romans established a beachhead, but Britain was not conquered. The campaign was more of a demonstration than a full occupation. Caesar returned the following year with a larger force. This time, he crossed the Thames. Several British tribes submitted. Others continued resisting, but Caesar eventually withdrew. He had not conquered Britain, yet politically, the expedition was valuable. He could return to Rome claiming that Roman armies had reached the edge of the known world. But while Caesar was building his reputation, Gaul was becoming increasingly unstable. The tribes had watched Rome expand year after year. They understood that surrendering individually meant losing their independence. A new leader began convincing them that cooperation was their only chance. His name was Vercingetorix. He was a young Arvernian nobleman, but he possessed something Caesar's earlier enemies had lacked: a unified strategy. Vercingetorix urged the Gallic tribes to stop fighting Rome separately. Instead, they would attack Roman supply lines, destroy food stores, avoid unnecessary open battles, and force Caesar's army to operate far from its bases. The strategy worked for the first time. Caesar faced a coordinated Gallic resistance. Roman forces suffered setbacks. Then came the siege of Avaricum. Vercingetorix had destroyed supplies throughout the surrounding region, but he decided to defend Avaricum. Caesar surrounded the city. Roman engineers constructed siege works. The defenders fought desperately. Eventually, the Romans broke through. The city fell. Caesar's soldiers captured enormous supplies. The victory restored Roman confidence, but Vercingetorix had not been destroyed. He retreated toward Gergovia there. Caesar suffered one of his most serious defeats. Roman troops attacked the Gallic position. The terrain favored the defenders. The assault went badly. Roman soldiers were forced to retreat. Caesar had lost hundreds of men. More importantly, the Gauls realized Rome could be defeated. Vercingetorix now had momentum, but Caesar remained calm. He reorganized his forces. He strengthened his cavalry, and he prepared for another confrontation. The two armies eventually met near Alesia. Vercingetorix entered the fortified settlement with a large force. Caesar surrounded it. But then something unexpected happened. A massive Gallic relief army arrived from outside. Caesar was suddenly trapped between two enemies. His army faced attackers inside the fortress, and another enormous force outside. The situation appeared almost impossible. Caesar responded with one of the greatest engineering operations of his career. His soldiers built two enormous lines of fortifications. One faced inward, the other faced outward. Trenches, walls, watchtowers, ditches, and hidden obstacles covered the surrounding landscape. The Romans had transformed the battlefield into a fortified ring. Then, the attacks began. For days, Gallic warriors assaulted the Roman defenses. Roman soldiers fought desperately. Caesar personally moved between threatened positions. At one critical moment, the outer Gallic army nearly broke through. The Roman line began to collapse. Then Caesar appeared on the battlefield. His presence restored confidence. Roman cavalry launched a counterattack. The Gallic relief army was defeated. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix realized the situation was hopeless. He surrendered. The great Gallic rebellion had failed. Caesar had conquered Gaul. But the victory changed something far more important than the map. He now commanded an experienced army, a wealthy treasury, and soldiers who had followed him through years of brutal warfare back in Rome. His political enemies were becoming increasingly alarmed. Caesar's command in Gaul would eventually end. Roman law required him to return without his army. That was the normal rule. But Caesar now faced a terrifying choice. If he returned to Rome as a private citizen, his enemies could prosecute him. His political career could collapse. His fortune could disappear. His enemies could destroy everything he had built. But if he returned with his army, he would be challenging the authority of the Roman Republic itself. Caesar stood at the edge of the most important decision of his life. Behind him was the army that had made him powerful. Ahead was Rome, and between them was a small river that would soon become one of the most famous boundaries in history, the Rubicon. The Rubicon. Caesar had conquered Gaul. He had defeated powerful armies, crossed the Rhine, reached Britain, and built an army whose loyalty belonged to him more than almost any other commander in Rome. But victory had created a dangerous problem. Caesar was still legally a Roman politician, and his military command could not last forever. Roman law required a governor returning from his province to surrender his command before entering Italy. Without his army, Caesar would become vulnerable. His political enemies were waiting. Among them stood Pompey the Great, the same Pompey who had once been Caesar's ally, the same man who had helped create the political alliance that launched Caesar's rise. But that alliance had collapsed. Crassus was dead. The political balance had changed, and Pompey now increasingly stood against Caesar. The Roman Senate demanded that Caesar disband his army. Caesar proposed a compromise. He would surrender his command. If Pompey did the same, the Senate rejected the offer. The situation became increasingly dangerous. Every negotiation failed. Every compromise disappeared. Caesar now faced a decision with consequences no Roman could predict: return to Rome without his army, and risk prosecution, or cross the Rubicon with his soldiers, and effectively declare war on the Roman state. For centuries, Roman commanders had understood one rule: an army could not legally enter Italy under its commander's authority. The Rubicon marked the boundary. Beyond it lay the heart of the Republic. Caesar reached the river in early 49 BC. His soldiers waited. No one knew what their commander would decide. According to later historians, Caesar stood silently for some time. Then he made his choice. He crossed the river. Ancient writers later associated the moment with the famous phrase, "The die is cast." Whether Caesar actually said those exact words remains uncertain, but the meaning of the decision was unmistakable. There would be no peaceful return. Civil war had begun. The news shocked Rome. Pompey and many senators realized they could not immediately defend the city. Instead, they withdrew south. Their plan was to reach the ports, cross the Adriatic, and gather forces in Greece. Caesar moved rapidly. His greatest weapon was speed. Cities surrendered. Officials abandoned their posts. Roman commanders changed sides within weeks. Caesar controlled much of Italy. Pompey had underestimated how quickly Caesar could move. But Pompey was not defeated. He escaped across the sea and began assembling a massive army. Caesar followed, but his first attempt to cross the Adriatic failed. Pompey's fleet controlled the sea. Caesar's army was divided. Some troops remained in Italy. Others had crossed with him. Supplies were running low. The situation became extremely dangerous. Then Caesar made another risky decision. He crossed the sea secretly, returning to Italy. His goal was to bring the rest of his army to Greece. The journey was dangerous, but Caesar succeeded soon. His forces were reunited. Pompey now commanded a much larger army. The two sides eventually confronted each other in Greece. Caesar's soldiers were experienced veterans, but they were heavily outnumbered at Dyrrhachium. Pompey attacked Caesar's defensive lines. The battle became a serious setback for Caesar. His army suffered heavy losses. For once, Caesar was forced to retreat. Pompey's commanders believed victory was close. But Pompey hesitated, instead of destroying Caesar immediately. He allowed him to withdraw. Caesar reportedly told his officers that the enemy had won the war that day. If only they had known how to use their victory. It was a costly mistake for Pompey. Caesar reorganized his army. He moved deeper into Greece. Pompey followed, eventually. The two armies met on a plain near the city of Pharsalus. The battlefield would decide the future of Rome. Pompey possessed the numerical advantage. His cavalry was especially strong. Caesar understood that he could not win by simply matching Pompey's formation. He needed a different strategy. Caesar placed his strongest cavalry on one wing. Then, he secretly positioned additional infantry behind them. These soldiers had one purpose: stop Pompey's cavalry. The battle began. Pompey's larger army advanced. Roman infantry collided across the plain. Dust filled the air. Commands became difficult to hear. The fighting spread across the battlefield. Then Pompey's cavalry attacked Caesar's horsemen. At first, the maneuver seemed successful. Caesar's cavalry began giving ground. Pompey believed the Roman line was collapsing, but then Caesar's hidden reserve appeared. The additional infantry struck Pompey's cavalry from the side. The cavalry formation broke. Caesar immediately ordered his troops forward. The battle turned. Pompey's army began collapsing. Thousands fled, others surrendered. The victory was decisive. Pompey escaped the battlefield, but his political position was finished. He fled toward Egypt, hoping to find protection there. Instead, he encountered betrayal. When Pompey reached the Egyptian coast, he was killed by men acting on behalf of the young Egyptian king. Caesar soon arrived in Alexandria there. He was presented with Pompey's severed head. Caesar reportedly reacted with anger and sadness. Pompey had once been his ally, his son-in-law, and one of Rome's greatest generals. Now, he was dead. But Egypt created another unexpected chapter in Caesar's story. The country was ruled by a young king named Ptolemy XIII. He was engaged in a bitter struggle with his sister, Cleopatra. Cleopatra was also a claimant to the Egyptian throne. When Caesar arrived, she needed his support. According to the famous story, Cleopatra secretly entered Caesar's quarters concealed inside a rolled-up carpet. Whether the story happened exactly that way is debated, but the political alliance that followed was real. Caesar supported Cleopatra. Ptolemy's forces resisted. The conflict soon became a war in Alexandria. Caesar's small force was surrounded. The situation became extremely dangerous. Egyptian soldiers attacked from the streets. Fighting spread around the royal district. At one point, the famous library of Alexandria was damaged by fire during the fighting. Exactly how much of the library was destroyed remains debated by historians. But the battle continued. Caesar received reinforcements. Ptolemy's forces were defeated. Cleopatra emerged as the dominant ruler of Egypt, and Caesar had gained another powerful ally. But the Roman Civil War was not finished. Caesar still had enemies. His former ally had supporters throughout the Mediterranean. New armies were forming. New rebellions were beginning. Caesar would have to fight again and again. He moved rapidly from one battlefield to another in Asia Minor. He defeated a rebellion with astonishing speed. His famous report was brief. I came, I saw, I conquered. The phrase became legendary. But Caesar's greatest challenge was still ahead. The remaining Republican forces had gathered in North Africa. Their commanders included some of Rome's most experienced politicians and generals. Among them was Cato. And once again, Caesar would have to prove that his army could defeat an enemy determined to destroy him. The Republic was breaking apart. Caesar was becoming more powerful. And Rome was beginning to face a question it had never answered before. Could the Republic survive the man who had saved it from its enemies? The dictator of Rome, Caesar, had defeated Pompey, but winning the civil war was not the same as restoring Rome. The Republic was exhausted. Its armies had fought one another. Its political institutions were divided, and Caesar now possessed more military power than any Roman leader before him. Yet his enemies were still fighting. In North Africa, Pompey's supporters gathered around a new coalition. Among them was Cato, one of the most uncompromising defenders of the old Republic. Caesar sailed to Africa. His army was smaller than the forces waiting for him, but once again, He relied on discipline, speed, and experience. The final confrontation came at Thapsus. Caesar's veterans attacked. The Republican army collapsed. The victory effectively destroyed organized resistance in Africa. Caesar refused to surrender, rather than allow himself to be captured. He chose death for Caesar. The victory was another step toward absolute power. There was now almost no serious military force left to challenge him. Caesar returned to Rome. The people celebrated his victories. Triumphs were organized, games were held, and enormous celebrations filled the city. Caesar had defeated Gauls, Egyptians, and Romans. He had expanded Rome's territory dramatically, but behind the celebrations, a deeper question remained. What exactly was Caesar now? He had begun his career as a politician inside the Republic. Now, he was effectively its most powerful ruler. The Senate granted him extraordinary honors. He received repeated consulships. He was appointed dictator. Eventually, his position became dictator for life. This was an extraordinary development. Rome had once expelled its kings. For centuries, Romans had proudly described themselves as citizens of a republic. No king would rule them again. Yet Caesar now possessed authority that looked increasingly similar to monarchy. He did not officially call himself king. That distinction mattered. Roman political culture hated the idea of kingship. But Caesar accepted more and more honors. Statues were erected. His image appeared in public places. His name became associated with political authority throughout the Roman world. Some Romans admired him. Others became deeply suspicious. Was Caesar saving the Republic or destroying it? Caesar himself believed he was bringing order. Rome had suffered decades of political violence. He wanted stability. He introduced reforms. One of the most important was the calendar. The Roman calendar had become badly misaligned with the seasons. Caesar ordered a major reform. The result was the Julian calendar. It introduced a much more accurate system of measuring the year. Its influence would last for centuries. Caesar also addressed debts, veterans, citizenship, colonies, and the administration of Rome's expanding territories. Thousands of Roman citizens were settled in new communities. Veterans received land. Provincial administration was reorganized. Some of Caesar's reforms were practical attempts to solve problems that had troubled Rome for generations. But reform was not the same as popularity. His growing authority frightened powerful senators. They remembered the history of Rome. They remembered that their ancestors had removed kings. And now, one man was accumulating unprecedented power. Among Caesar's critics were men who believed the Republic could still be restored. Two names would eventually become especially important: Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Both had reasons to oppose Caesar. Brutus was particularly complicated. His family had connections to the ancient republican tradition. Caesar had also treated him with considerable favor. He had forgiven him after the Civil War. He had given him political positions. Yet Brutus became convinced that Caesar's power threatened Rome itself. Cassius was more openly hostile. He had served under Caesar, but increasingly opposed his rise. Together, they began building a conspiracy. At first, only a small number of men were involved. Then the group grew: senators, politicians, and former supporters of Pompey. They shared one belief: Caesar had to die. But there was a major problem. How could they kill the most powerful man in Rome? Caesar was surrounded by supporters. His public schedule was unpredictable, and his popularity among ordinary citizens made the conspirators nervous. They needed a moment when Caesar would be vulnerable. That moment eventually arrived. The Senate planned to meet on the Ides of March. March 1544 BC. Caesar had been warned about danger. Ancient sources tell several stories. A soothsayer reportedly warned him to beware the Ides of March. His wife Calpurnia allegedly experienced disturbing dreams. Friends may also have urged him to stay home. Caesar ignored the warnings. He went to the Senate. Inside, the conspirators were waiting. Caesar entered. The meeting began then. One senator approached him. A request was presented. Caesar refused. The senator grabbed his clothing. That was the signal. The conspirators attacked. Caesar was surrounded. Blades struck from different directions. He tried to defend himself, but the attackers were numerous. Ancient writers disagree about the exact details of his final moments. One famous tradition claims Caesar saw Brutus among the attackers and spoke words expressing shock, but the exact phrase is uncertain. What is certain is that Caesar was killed. He fell near the base of Pompey's statue. The irony was extraordinary. The man who had defeated Pompey had died beside Pompey's image. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic. They expected Romans to celebrate instead. Rome was thrown into confusion. Caesar's supporters were furious. His enemies were uncertain. The Senate had removed one man, but it had not solved the problems that had produced Caesar, and the conspirators soon discovered something they had failed to understand. Killing Caesar did not kill Caesar's influence, his name, his soldiers, his wealth, his political network, and his enormous popularity all survived him. Then, a young man entered the story. He was Caesar's adopted heir. His name was Gaius Octavius. He was only 18 years old. Few people in Rome understood what was about to happen. Octavian would eventually become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, but before that, he would have to confront Caesar's assassins, and he would have to defeat another powerful Roman who had once been Caesar's closest ally, Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony. The death of Caesar had not ended the struggle for Rome. It had only opened the next chapter, and this time, the battle would determine not whether Caesar ruled Rome, but what kind of Rome would rise from his ashes.